The 7 weeks that the Buddha spent in residence at Bodh Gaya are commemorated at Bodh Gaya by various shrines, but these were rarely replicated elsewhere. However, there is one complex in Myanmar, as well as one in Thailand, that also commemorate these 7 weeks. The complex in Myanmar is at Bago, which was known as Pegu, and is dated to the 15th century. Stone inscriptions connected to the shrines in Pegu suggest the importance that was attached to designing the site according to the layout at Bodh Gaya. Indeed, the efficacy of the site was enhanced by its resemblance to the original in India. The ground plan at Pegu did not derive from 15th century India, but was based on an influential biography of the Buddha and descriptions of Bodh Gaya compiled by pilgrims from Southeast Asia. The shrines at Pegu were first noticed in the late 19th century, at a time when the English were beginning to explore and document Myanmar's past. The monuments dedicated to the stations were constructed over a wide area encompassing approximately a square kilometer. The largest shrine, marking the first week, signaled the Buddha's enlightenment. Its central position and its size indicate that it was the principal monument around which the others were oriented. Another station is situated a short distance to the east of the principal temple and is dedicated to the 5th week. Both these monuments are constructed of brick and surrounded by high brick walls. In the vicinity of each station was a large stone inscription whose text provided a summary of the episodes in the life of the Buddha that each shrine commemorated. Since the site's discovery, attention has been centered almost entirely on hundreds of terracotta plaques that were originally inserted into niches on the faces of the compound walls of the 2 extant temples. Figures in high relief on the tiles depicted the demons and female temptresses who played a prominent role during the Buddha's residence at Bodh Gaya. Many plaques were dispersed long ago into European public collections, where they have provided the West with its only tangible knowledge of this Buddhist site. The 7 stations mark the enlightenment of the Buddha and the immediately succeeding events of his biography. After a week of meditation under the tree, the Buddha achieved enlightenment after defeating the demon Mara and his army. The Buddha then spent a 2nd week in a steadfast gaze at the tree of enlightenment. The 3rd week was occupied in walking from east to west upon a jeweled walkway. The gods then created a jeweled house as the Buddha's residence during his 4th week. The 5th week was devoted to sitting beneath a tree belonging to the goat herd named Ajapala. During this week, Mara's 3 seductive daughters failed to distract the Buddha from his meditative course. The main event of the 6th week was a snake king's sheltering the Buddha from a storm. The Buddha spent the final week beneath the Rayayanta tree, enjoying his emancipation from worldly attachments. At the end of the 7th week, on the 49th day, the Buddha granted strands of his hair to 2 traveling Indian merchants who returned home and enshrined the relics. The merchants, the brothers Tapasu and Baluka, are considered to be the first lay disciples of the Buddha, and the hair relics are thought to be the first of the Buddha's corporal relics to have become objects of worship. As a token of their devotion, the brothers donated food to the Buddha. The Mons of the 15th century maintain that the merchants were from Lower Burma, and that the hair relics are those now in the national shrine in Yangon. The first station, which signified the Enlightenment, was the favorite subject of the Buddhist artists of Southeast Asia. They generally depicted the Buddha in a seated position, often beneath a tree, with his extended right hand touching the earth. This gesture of his hand indicates his call to the earth goddess to affirm his spiritual fitness at the end of the 1st week. Following this moment, the demon Mara and his army flee in defeat. The remaining 6 stations are rarely depicted separately. An exception are images of the Buddha protected by the hoods of the snake king Mukchalinda, which marked the 6th week, as we see in this statue, which is now in the National Museum in Bangkok. Stone inscriptions at Pegu indicate that the complex devoted to the stations was dedicated on a single day during the summer of 1479. None of the inscriptions suggest that any of the monuments contained relics, but the theme of the stations was inextricably connected to the hair relics that are featured during the 7th week. The mode of worship at the site is unknown, but the wording of the inscriptions suggests that devotees move between stations in the proper sequence and pause to read the accompanying epigraphs. The most important remains from this entire period at Pegu are a great number of glazed terracotta plaques that once belonged to the compound walls of the central temple and the goat herd's shrine. The figures on the tiles depict the army of the demon Mara and his 3 seductive daughters, who are allegories of lust, passion, and thirst. Representing attachment to worldly desires, Mara and the 3 sisters symbolize the Buddhists' an ever-present challenge in overcoming sensual and emotional bonds. The sparse documentation at the time of the discovery in the late 19th century suggests that the total number of surviving plaques was between 200 and 300. At least 200 tiles were transferred to the old Pegu Museum in Yangon in the early 1900s, but some of these were perhaps destroyed during the Japanese occupation. Approximately 50 plaques are under the care of the Department of Archaeology in Myanmar, while an approximately equal number were dispersed long ago into public collections in the West. The tiles depicting Mara's daughters and his demons are glazed in a limited spectrum of colors, normally tan, green, blue, brown, and red. A few are colored in a single hue, and an even smaller number are without glaze. The plaques were produced in 2 basic stages. The initial step was the formation of a thick slab of clay, perhaps in a wooden mold. Before the clay hardened, the loosely formed figures were pressed into the flat background. Small, separately fashioned segments of clay were added to create the jewelry and weapons. Before the application of colored glazes, thin lines were incised to produce bold surface ornamentation. Small molds creating shallow, raised designs were used on some of the women's garments. Such molds never seem to have been used on the demon plaques. Certain incised lines on the demons suggest musculature, imply that the sculptors perhaps based their works upon 2-dimensional designs for which linear elements alone define volume and depth. While the demons exhibit great inventiveness and technical achievement, the daughters are uneven in quality in some fairly crude examples, which could be mistaken for fakes. The careful detailing of the garments has been replaced by simple, unadorned shapes fashioned by hand. Additional figure sculpture from this period in Lower Burma is difficult to identify, and therefore few comparisons can be drawn with the plaques. Inscriptions at Pegu, however, suggest that the bulk of the figurative work consisted of now lost stucco ornamentation placed at the exterior of brick structures. Inasmuch as the tradition of the stations was rarely, if ever, commemorated by monuments in Myanmar or elsewhere, the choice of the theme in Pegu and its related shrines in Yangon reflected a unique combination of local requirements at a particular moment in Myanmar's history. The interplay between regional myths, sacred texts, and royal patronage reveals the complex nature of the transformation of a Buddhist theme and its development beyond India.